webinar. This is our November installment of this year's speaker series. I'm Yvonne Chen, a member of NAP San Francisco, which is a chapter of the National Association of Asian American Professionals. NAP San Francisco is a leadership and professional development organization for Asian Americans in the San Francisco Bay Area. We host events, workshops, webinars like this one, and conferences that help people like you and me advance in our careers and become better leaders. Just a little bit about NAP San Francisco's mission. We have three core principles that we do. It's cultivate and empower leaders for professional excellence, connect accomplished professionals for mutual success, engage and participate with the community at large. And we also inspire leaders to make a meaningful difference in government, education, business, and society. So thanks for attending today's webinar and taking time out of your day. Today's webinar is about self-awareness and roadblocks. What if the biggest barrier to your career advancement was something you can't even see? For many Asian American professionals in corporate America, there exists a hidden blind spot or a state of unconscious incompetence when it comes to leadership development. Without parental role models who have navigated these paths and with cultural norms that differ from Western expectations, many find, ourselves unaware of the skills and strategies needed to rise to leadership positions. And now I'd like to just briefly introduce our honored speaker that's here with us today, Jim Lee. So Jim is the Director of Organizational Strategy and Leadership Development at SACE, which is the National Association of Scientists, and Bespoke. He's a chief executive, coach, and founder. Jim began his career in the Bay Area in corporate telecom, proving that empowered, humble employees led by influence, not by authority, achieve lasting results. And today he serves as Director of Organizational Strategy and Leadership Development for SACE, where he helps companies design and implement transformational leadership programs. Jim also coaches executives as an external coach for McKinsey's Asian Executive Leadership Program. And through his companies, Bespoke and JL Advocates, he builds leadership development programs and coaches executive leaders. He's partnered with Asian employee resource groups at the NFL, Google, US Bank, Honeywell, and Northrop Grumman, equipping leaders to expand, influence, and drive.
So Brandon Lee is a serial founder and reinventionist, and he'll be moderating this event today. His journey spans from leadership development for nonprofits, flipping houses, building a soft skills educational company for teens, running operations at a YC startup. Brandon currently runs a personality test company called Genius of You, helping people architect their lives and careers around what they enjoy. Brandon has a deep passion for teaching, coaching, and empowering others to be their fullest selves, which we'll see soon. His writing and video content have garnered over 2 million views and have been featured on media outlets like Inc.com, Time, BBC, Huffington Post. On the side, he's a personal growth junkie, invests in real estate, and rotates between 11 languages on Duolingo. And now, without further ado, take it away, Brandon and Jim.
Thank you for having us, Jim. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Nat, for having us. Yeah, as all of you know about the topic today, before we dive in, we'd love to just invite you as the audience to just chime in a little bit about your own experiences, about how you feel like being Asian has impacted your ability to progress professionally. So whatever little stories that you have, feel free to throw it in the chat, or feel free to raise your hand, and we would love to hear just some firsthand experiences.
And if I could add to that, yeah, definitely grateful to have so many people on camera. And I know it's sometimes hard for us to join on camera, but I really wanted to encourage us to be able to exercise the uncomfortableness of maybe being seen and not being hidden behind the scenes. Or I know a lot of you might be multitasking, but really do yourself a service and pour into yourself by being able to fully engage in this conversation. And I think part of the blind spots, Brandon, that we have in leadership is some of these things. Like most of the time, when I engage in webinars that are with Asian, I will say at least 50% of them are off camera. But then when I'm in similar type of conversations that are not predominantly Asian, I will find that it's the opposite's true. We'll find more than 50% of the people in the participants asking questions. They're engaged, they're raising their hands. And I would say even specifically, I find even South Asians a lot more vocal and engaging than East Asians. And from it, you can see a lot of correlation when it comes to representation in upper leaders of management, that are those that are not afraid of being seen, being heard, are the ones that do get the nod and the opportunities. So again, I want to invite, I know a lot of you may not have been ready for that, and I understand, but if your hair looks a little bit like Brandon's, I think it's okay. If you don't look as button up and tidy as Yvonne, I think that's okay. So Michelle, Jay, thanks so much for hopping on and making that transition. But it's my invitation for us. Like we want to serve you well.
Yeah, maybe I'll start just to kick it off. One of my earlier careers was actually in real estate, and I was actually flipping houses, like in my bio. And real estate is a very old and white industry. And so when I was very first starting out, uh, I was showing up in at meetups, real estate meetups, and I was like one of the only Asian people, and like on top of that, one of the only like people in my 20s at the time. And so there was a lot of skepticism. People were like, who are you? And like, there's a lot of skepticism about my competence very, very early on. And so very overlooked very early on. So that's just a little snippet of something that I've been through.
Anybody else have a story that they want to share? And you don't have to type it in. You could actually raise your hand and engage. But we want to make this a fireside chat, right? We're all together, taking advantage of a virtual environment to simulate as if you're in my living room and we're all talking in a way. We've got great snacks out there. Michelle is taking a part of great beverages. I think Christine's got some wine on her table. Like it's just one of those things that, like, we want this to be time for us.
Well, oh,
I'll share briefly. I work at Del Monte. I've had a 16-year career at this company. I've made my way from kind of the technical route to management to senior director level, but I recall a manager of mine asking like, "Oh, like, do you think your upbringing has anything to do with who you are today?" And it was slightly uncomfortable. But I was like, I listen to orders, I do my task, I'm respectful to um, leadership, but I've developed my own perspective and voice and have learned to say no and push back on my cross functional teams. So when I've shared with peers or others in the industry newer, I've been able to find my voice both professionally and personally. And I think that's really helped me become the leader I am today.
That's wonderful. What are some things that maybe are um, misbeliefs or like some uh, areas that were misunderstood on leadership that you were able to calibrate by learning to speak up?
I thought I had to have like a work me and a non-work me. But once I was able to combine, I was able to just be more open and speak freely. I also picked up taiko drumming on the side as a hobby. And with that, you're able to yell and be loud as part of the performance. So that muscle literally has flexed the past 13 years. And I'm like the loudest person and enjoy and share my enthusiasm through that hobby. So I think it's also translated.
It's awesome.
can I jump in?
Yes.
Okay. John Falk knows that I'm not shy, and I wasn't shy since I was born. I'm one of the 1% exceptions. First of all, I'm 73 years old. I retired 3 years ago after 46 years in healthcare, 42 years in leadership role. So I became a manager in a department of 20 people with 18 white and 2 Asian. Part of that is I, particularly in my generation, is exceptional. My parents brought me up, never tell me to keep my head down, which unfortunately, even today, when I mentor others, I always ask that question. What did your parents tell you? Still a lot of people at 20 years younger than I tell their kids to keep their head down. So I always keep my head up and I always have a loud mouth. So I get into all sort of trouble when I was in Hong Kong. But when I immigrated to the US when I was 20-year old in 1973, and everything changed. So when opportunity comes up, I always like to share my experience with others. And for the 20 years of my career, particularly in healthcare, is all white leadership position in the 80s and 90s. So I was the highest ranking Asian in the organization for the first 20 years. But of course, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, a lot has changed. Right now, there's a lot more Asian in leadership role in healthcare, but still not enough. I can go on, but I better stop now. And knowing myself, I can keep talking without taking a breath for 2 hours. Back to you.
I thought I saw a hand, like a virtual hand.
I think it was Alan.
Yeah, I could comment that I don't know if it's a glass ceiling, but I do see in it, so I'm trying to move towards a director role, and most of the directors are either Caucasian or Indian, and occasionally Asian. And I think what is I've learned is like, and when I chose my career, I chose engineering, and I didn't realize how important effective communication and crafting your story, or crafting your executive pitch is so important in your face of the company. So I think that's just an observation I have, is that is very key now at the office, is the expectation is that you perform at that level or even better, and also being more and speaking up. So it's not just like you said, putting your head down, but like doing the work and then presenting it, or just saying, "Hey, boss, I want to be there, co-presenting with you." So I think more of the glass ceiling for me is like the where some of us are in business school, so it's the language of business. You're no longer the doer or executor. You're actually supposed to lead or drive the business strategy. So like
Mhm.
the thing about the MBA, it's been really empowering, is that you now have somewhat of an equal footing because you have the conversation. Now it's just, or you're beginning to have some of that business conversation versus like coding or project management or engineering. So um, I think I've been steered towards like math and sciences, but I find that is can take you only so far in a modern org.
I can throw something out in the blind spot department. I'm fourth generation, and so I actually didn't think I had a lot of the traditional Asian blind spots because I've been in the U.S. my whole life, and then I realized actually kind of recently about asking for a promotion. I saw someone ask for a promotion and get it, and I thought, "Holy cow! You just ask," because in my roles, I thought I'm just going to get ahead by being awesome, and the promotions will just show up on their own, which generally they did. So I thought that was the way. But then I saw somebody go to the EVP and say, I want to do, X. And then they got X. And I realized, oh, yeah, you know what? I got the blind spots just like everybody else has blind spots.
Mm.
Amazing, amazing. Definitely resonate with a lot of that default mindset, Christine. Um, It's great. Thank you for all for chiming in and sharing a little bit about your experiences. From there, I would actually love to hear, Jim, what are some of your personal experiences given your trajectory so far? And curious what echoes of experience that you've had that others have shared. And yeah,
Yeah, thank you. In my career, I think I've identified similarly with everyone's story in some ways or another. Namely, the area of keeping my head down, working hard, not to brag and draw attention to myself. That was a very strong one, but let my work show for itself. And I remember, like in third grade, when my parents came to our classroom. And it's funny. They saw my name on the board on the top left. And they're like, good job. Your name is on the board. You're doing something great. And I was like, yeah, I'm working hard. I didn't have the guts to tell them my name was on the board because I was in trouble. Like you put your name on the board if you talk too much and then you speak up and write like that. Because for me, I just didn't connect with a lot of how things were done in school. And in hindsight, I realized like I am constantly talking to my neighbors because I'm asking them questions. I'm like, what is she saying? And she thought I was just like playing around. Fast forward to sixth grade where my parents, again, my names were on the board and my name wasn't there. She's like, how come your name's not on the board? And in this case, it was because the teacher only puts like the top students on the board, like based upon their test results. And for me, it was one of those things. Like again, my parents always wanted like my name in lights to showcase my achievements, but it was not something that I would ever elevate. It was something that the teachers would do for us. And so from that paradigm comes other challenges, right? Like, always working hard and not talking about what I wanted to achieve or what I want to be able to have experiences at my job. In fact, like the blind spot there was I was never told to have personal goals. Like my goal was to make the company look good and to work hard and achieve their goals. But I didn't ever have goals myself, right? So then if I don't have goals coming into a company, then I realize I'm not advocating for work that I really want to have. I'm not contributing to other type of opportunities that may shift how things are done to showcase my own skill sets. And so therefore I was always a hard worker, but passed up for promotion because I was not taking ownership of the job. I was just being really responsible with it. And if I think about like Asian cultural traits, like responsibility is a big thing. Like we have to be very responsible. But I think ownership is like responsibility plus a vision that I have for myself. And I'm going to take ownership of this job, which means I'm going to tell the manager what I need to do well. And I think those are some things that kind of, flash through my experiences as I recollect and hearing your stories about some key points that coincide.
thanks for sharing that, Jim. So there's like two overall themes that I'm hearing. One is relating to the whole just let my work speak for itself and like the rest will take care of itself. And then this last point you just mentioned around taking responsibility and ownership and vision for your role rather than just being responsible. I'm curious for either of those, whichever comes to mind first, how did those things switch for you? When did you realize that something was amiss and something was holding you back? Well, one of those minds was holding you back. And then how did you actually overcome that? How did you make that switch?
Yeah, so I'll share some slides. I think this kind of helps me to kind of frame up like what my experiences were like. And I'm sure a lot of you probably have similar type of experiences where, for me, like I think it was always about being responsible and doing well. And so when I was like in my first role of a director type of a position, right? So I think like I worked really hard and so I got a management role, right? And then at that point, I changed companies to be able to get more of a director role. And at that point, it's when it really is like helped me to see that the reason why I had to switch companies was because I kept hitting the ceiling. And I felt like by switching roles, I could showcase my hard work and all my achievements, and I am deserving of this opportunity, and that's how I got it. But when I look at like my academic background, it's always been like get good grades, right? And I'm sure a lot of you think like everything was about getting good grades. And I couldn't do anything else except it was to help me with my university application. So, I had to study, come home, study. And then in high school, I wanted to play sports. And I remember like wanting to play football. And my parents were like, no, you can't play football because it's like 3 hours of practice every day. When are you going to study? And I said, well, mom, what should I do? And so it's like, well, keep playing violin, right? Like, why don't you keep playing violin and you could join the chess club, like all these academic stuff. And I said, mom, like in these universities, they want to see you as a differentiator. And if you look at all these people, I showed her like past yearbooks, like, look, they're all Asian. How many Asians do you see on the football team? They're like, one? I'm like, yes. So if I join the football team, I am going to be a differentiator. And I'm going to be able to leverage that as a skill set, as a strength in my college application so that I can get into university. Thankfully, it worked. But the key was like my parents like protected education more than anything else. And so you go to college, right? Same thing. You're trying to get your best grades, but at this point, like internships and all those things are important to do. And so because you're really trying to create a resume for your first job. And I was doing that, I got that job. Like I was able to get a job. I was great at what it is, but I always got passed up for promotion. And so a lot of Asians, I noticed like there's a story for Asians where a lot of my Asian friends were going back to grad school. And that was the only way that they could actually make it. They had to get like an MBA, or they finally went to law school, or like, you know what, I guess I have to go to med school or get like their accounting degree. But I was like, but what about these other people that don't have to do that? Like, how come I can't take that route instead? And that's when it really hit me that there is another way. And at some point, I felt like there was a racial bias against it. But the reality probably is not as much as what am I doing to contribute to it. And then fast forward, like again, 10 years down in my career, I got this job as a director. And I remember like I interviewed, they asked me all these questions, we're looking for this type of a goal, and what are some of your ideas and strategies that we could take to achieve this? Here are some of our values, here's our mission and vision. How would you inspire people to help us to achieve these goals? And I guess I did very well. And they're not only just because I got the job, but I remember like 4 months into the role, Billy, who I still am friends with, like 20 years later, he came up to me, he goes, hey, Jim, take a seat here. And I sat down, he goes, hey, when you interviewed, you had this idea, this plan, and all these things, and where are they? I have not seen any of those ideas that you shared in the interview come to life. And I said, but Billy, like you told me your thoughts and your ideas on what I should do to move this office forward. And so I'm trying to be responsible and make sure I implement those plans. He goes, I don't give a bleep about you doing my plans. I hired you to do your plans. And that's when it just blew my mind. I was like, you're telling me to do things my way, not his own way. And I think that also exemplifies what kind of a leader he was, right? He was someone that really wanted me to take ownership of the role, but that was key. He wanted me to have ownership. He wanted me to tell him what I needed to do. And from that moment on, like all my ideas started to come. And I just redid things. And one of the claims to fame was that I took, what would be 8 months to revenue $2 million, and I shortened it to 8 days with my ideas. And that took notice for one area of our division. And then we scaled that out into all three areas. And then the whole company did that. And so they moved from taking 8 months to revenue $2.4 billion into 8 days. And it was such a game changer, but not only for the company, but for me. And I think that's another thing that we have to realize is like, what are we doing for ourselves? Because I wanted the skill sets to not only be able to implement new ideas, to be able to come up with a vision and vision cast, sell up the chain, learn how to trial projects, learn how to motivate my sales team to do things differently. Like those are all strong leadership skill sets that I needed to have in order for me to continue further down. And what I want to do was eventually run a business and run a company. So I got what I needed and the company got what it needed. But that all became because I took ownership of the role, because my director or my GM said, like, no, like don't do what I tell you to do. I want you to do what you think is best.
Yeah. So to recap, it sounds like the core tipping point for you to switch was Billy basically saying, "Hey, where did interview Jim go? And where
Yeah.
was the vision that he had go?" And basically permissioning you to take the full reign. So I know Jim shared a lot, and so if you're paying attention and you have questions, I would definitely want to invite you to throw questions in the chat because I certainly don't have a monopoly on all the best questions, and of course we want this to be most relevant to you. But given that, my biggest question, Jim, is where did that vision come from? Like, how does if you're just switching to think about that and take ownership for the first time, like where does one learn to cultivate that sense of vision and ownership? Like in practice, what does that look like in the early days?
Yeah, so my parents were business owners, right? And they were very risk adverse. They owned a little sandwich shop, a deli. And I remember like they were just making sandwiches the way the previous owner did. It was a white couple that owned the sandwich shop and they sold it to my parents. And they had to learn how to make sandwiches that they've never eaten before and sell them, and that's how they made a living. And it's just kind of like mind boggling because as I got older, I was like, that's not how you make a sandwich. There's so many better ways to make a turkey sandwich. Why don't we do it this way? Why don't we do it that way? Like, this is when like Subway and like, do you remember Togo's? And like all these sandwich shops are coming in the scene. And they're like, no, we can't do that because they're very like low risk, right? And they don't want to change the formula to what they can predict in a way. And I think in my mind, that's what spurred like creativity. Like if I owned this sandwich shop, what would I have done differently? And you fast forward that to like, again, me learning to have worked in my parents' shop that I have all these ideas, but I am not allowed to implement any of them in that way. And so that creativity got stifled. But in between working at my sandwich shop growing up and then my job was these college years. And I remember my college years, like I didn't have a family member that went to school at an American university before. I didn't have any mentors. I didn't have anyone that could guide me. So in a sense, without realizing it, I think I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. But the reality is I'm making stuff up as I go along. My college career is all made up. I'm like, what are they doing? What are they doing? Okay, I think I got to do that too. And so as I realized, like I crafted my college experience from observing and trying to take things in, I was just making it up, so to speak, right? Now, obviously it was, quote unquote successful. I graduated and I got into a great job. But the reality is I had to learn to take chances. I made mistakes and I didn't do that intentionally as much, but it's something that I did. And I think sometimes for us, we have to be willing to say, okay, there's a certain mold. There are certain guardrails in our life. We have been told to do this, don't do that. But we really have to unpack where does that come from? Does that come from somebody that is a voice in our mind based upon how we were raised? How much of that cultural versus something that was informed or nurtured into us by our family, our parents, where we live? But all these things have to be assets and tools we use in the right place and space, not necessarily something that we use all the time because, that's all we've been taught and told in a way. So, as you asked me that question, like, how did I make that leap? I think it took a lot of me hitting my head on that bamboo ceiling so many times and not getting promoted to realizing and having Billy like really liberate me to say, look, I want you to tell me. And out of obedience and in a funny way, out of obedience of respecting my elders, I had to go against what he had told me to do before. And I think that's where it kind of activated me.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so what I'm hearing is just learning to cultivate that part of you that's like, wait, would I do this if I was in charge, would I do that? And nurturing that capacity. Shelley asked a great question that wanted to follow up on. So she said in the chat, you had a great manager that looked out for you and your development. Yeah, what would you advise for people who don't have their equivalent Billy, who basically invites you to challenge and create your own vision? But actually have managers who are maybe doing the opposite of like wanting to pigeonhole you instead of helping you flourish.
I have to like where that comes from is probably a blind spot again that we have where when you're at a job interview, how many of you actually go to a job interview and doing what you can to get the job versus going to the job interview, right? And like, hey, I'm going to be here. I'm going to be myself. I'm going to get to learn them. But if this is not a good fit, and this is not the type of person I want to work for, then I'm okay withdrawing from this opportunity. And I think for me, I've sorry, thanks for sharing, David. It's just one of those things where like it's so hard sometimes, and again, another, if I peel back the onion, it's like, well, if we're not networking, we're never finding opportunities that fit towards what we're looking for, right? We're always taking a job because either our company's downsizing, I'm being passed up for a promotion and I don't like it, right? So we have to see what are we doing to create the environment that we're in where we aren't able to kind of change the dynamics of our manager to where they're more open to hearing what we have to say. And instead, they tend to be prescriptive of what we're sharing. But again, look at that leadership dynamic. If you are someone that creates a vacuum of space where a lot of what gets filled is more from your leadership, not from yourself, then they are always going to drive the bus and you'll always be a passenger on the bus, right? So I think first step is like you have to establish that relationship. Or if it's too late at this point, my things would be is like, I love this opportunity. I remember there was this one time I was constantly told to do all the Excel spreadsheets for our team because in my undergraduate studies, like there was this Excel class where like I learned how to be like an Excel wizard. I hated it, but I was really good at it. And it was one of those things like I was constantly asked to do. And it killed me every Monday night to stay up late for our Tuesday meetings to prepare these sheets. And everyone's like, great job, Jim. Love it. Thank you so much. Right. And I'm like, it was nice to be recognized for hard work. Right. That's what we want. But the reality is, it's not the hard work I want to be recognized for. And it kind of pigeonholed in. So I had to tell my manager one time, and it took probably like 8 months for me to get the guts to say, like, hey, I know you like this work that you do, but is there something else I can do? It's like, what do you mean? Why would you want to do it? You're so good at this. Like, because it's like the least favorite thing about my job. And in fact, like, could you imagine how good I would be at something I really want to do and I think I'm really great at? And I would like for me to showcase that as well, which was actually training and coaching other people on my team. And so I got that role 6 months later because I finally spoke up. But if I hadn't, I think I would have still been doing Excel spreadsheets for a long time, right? So being able to like speak up and just, recognize being appreciative of what you have, but like, would it be okay if I share and start changing that dynamic so that you're not constantly the vacuum receiving things, but like, could you fill that vacuum and void so your manager doesn't feel like it has to fill it with what they see from you instead?
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is, on top of just doing what you're being given, is self-advocating for like, hey, I'm happy with what we're doing so far, and what I would love to do more of is X, Y, Z, and creating more awareness on your manager's side of what you're actually trying to shoot for.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a comment in the chat box I think that relates to like Freddie's talking about like when you look at the people around us, right? It isn't uncommon to look around and just see leaders who certainly do not consistently excel in the same thing, and they tend to be like, Caucasian, let's say, in his example. And I remember like in my workspace, that was so true because I would sit in my cubicle and behind me was my manager's door. And constantly, coworkers would come and knock on the door And they'd be like, hey, how's it going? How was your weekend? They talk about the football game. They talk about, their family went to the lake. They went jet skiing. In the back of my mind, I'm like, dude, this guy's totally kissing up. This guy's like, they're not talking about business. This is not a conversation that they should be having. It's a personal relationship. We're in business. And I don't know why my mind was so like fixated on that. But I think that's like executive presence, right? Is learning to build trust in different ways. And here they had a way that they trusted each other because they had so much more in common outside the work, right? And so guess who got promoted? Was always this person that came to my manager's door and they talked about things. And it was interesting, like, the manager would say, hey, I want all of you to kind of work on this assignment and I want you to do this in ABC. And then, like, 3 hours later, he would knock on the door. It's like, hey, I know you wanted to do this workshop of ABC, but I have an idea. What if we did like C, D, and E instead? He's like, oh, yeah, go for it. I'm like, man, that's favoritism. You told everybody to do ABC, and here I am busting my butt to do ABC, and this person's self-promoting, right? Self-advocating, sharing their own thoughts and ideas and taking ownership of the assignment to say C, D, E. But that came from also the trust and the comfort of all the other conversations that they had, right? So when you peel back, what does executive presence really mean? And how do we build those ceilings? It's almost like we don't feel like we can break through because we don't have permission or the relationship in that way to maybe self-advocate. And also because they don't know where we're coming from in a way. But again, my mindset, I remember this so vividly. It was like in 99, I was like, man, this guy's kissing up because he's talking about everything outside of work. And then if I fast forward, like, look at me, I always went to people and I would go to them to get work done. I was the jerk, right? I was just someone that used everybody almost like labor in that way. But that's how I saw myself, right? I treated everybody else the way I thought I was. And so if I'm constantly working toward performance and outcome, then that's how I treated everybody else. It was all about their performance and outcome, and their value to the team was about what they produced, but not who they are as a human intrinsically in a way.
So I want to hone in a little bit on what the phrase you kept saying, which was, oh, they're kissing up.
Yeah.
Do you relate to that phrase differently? And now, at like where you currently are, and hey, has that shifted over time? And how do you relate to that act of building trust in that executive presence way, in contrast to this sucking up concept?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I'd have to say if I looked at myself of how I build relationships today compared to like what I did before, like I'm such a butt kisser today, right? Because like, and I think even more so, right? Like, like John, this is my retirement job. Like I'm retired. I get to choose who I want to work with. I get to pick like the people that I want to create impact and where I want to spend my time. And in that, like my butt kissing is because I want people to like me and I want these people that I really admire to get to know me and I want to get to know them and see if like we can work together. And in some cases, granted, it's like dating, professional dating, right? It's like I want to get to know them. I'm going to put my best foot forward. I'm not going to be, I'm not going to compromise integrity. I'm not going to lie who my identity is, but I want to build a relationship. And I think that's part of the growth as well. It's like, yeah, am I naturally someone that, would do things for anybody? No. But that's part of my growth opportunity and my own leadership growth that I learn how to do things how other people want them, but they're worth it because I like them and I like what they're doing. And like for NAP SF, like doing this talk, like I chased John down. It's like, hey, John, I want to do a talk with you guys because I love what you're doing. I love the impact that you have in your mission and vision. And I want to be a part of it. And so in fact, like I drove all the way up to San Francisco. And like I try to make it easy for Christine and John to spend time with me, right? But would I do that for anybody? No. But I would do it for them because, hey, I appreciate this. And it's important for us in the shared vision and mission. And so could somebody see that as butt kissing? Possibly, right? They didn't pick me because I have a best-selling book, which I don't, right? They didn't pick me because I have 100 million followers on my YouTube, which I don't, right? But those aren't things that I want to attract other people with. I want to attract people because of the content of what I have, which is going back to like, I think the Asian side of like, I want you to like me for this, but it's that and the relational aspect of it. And my philosophy has always been is like I want to be the easiest person to work with, and I want it to be the case where you will choose to want to work with me so that I have more options on where I get to spend my time. And so likewise, like in our job, like if for me to get to know my manager, like Freddie, like if I worked for you, I want to know what Freddie likes. I want to do things Freddie's way. Because if I only do things my way, then I'm no good to Freddie and I'm a single way, I'm only able to do things a single way. So I'm not able to grow my leadership skills to learn a diversified way to present things. As well as, let's say, I work with Freddie and he doesn't like me. And then I go to Michelle. Michelle doesn't like me. Then, like, I got to find that one person that works just like me. And every job interview, then my perspective becomes this is what I do. This is how I do it. And it almost comes off like take it or leave it. Right. But then if I am open to do things in a different way and I've learned to achieve the same outcomes, maybe making a few mistakes, but it's always been growth, then when I interview for other people and they say like, we like to do things this way. Would you open to doing things this way? I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely. Let me tell you about a time when Freddie wanted me to do something and this is how I did it, but this is normally how I would have done it. And then did the same stuff for Michelle. Michelle likes it this way, but this is how I had to do it. And then now, for you, Shelley, more than happy to do it that way, right? Like these are the things that help us prevent the bamboo ceiling, I think, in a way that helps us to have all access because we're more open and willing to do things of how other people want us to do. And some people call it butt kissing. I just call it it's growth.
Yeah, I like what Shelly just said in the chat. You can call it butt kissing, but it could be just a plan, a strategy,
Yeah.
your approach. Muying said something interesting in chat, or asked, how do you fight the politics? And I think that's a very big question. So I'd love to just hear how you just take it, Jim, and what thoughts you have on it.
Yeah. So I think like politics is one of those things that's really hard for us to, I think Asians typically to play. And I think partly it's because we think we deserve a seat at the table, maybe, when we don't. And I think it's one of those things like we can be a little bit more sensitive to. So, for example, there's two biases I think we all have. We have a bias on we should get awarded spaces on the table based upon our merit and our success in the past, right? But the reality is that's not the case, but yet we keep using that. So I'll share another slide, right? Like, Asians, like we like education. It's one of those things that we tend to excel well in. And so therefore, like we deserve a seat at the table. Like we shouldn't have this bamboo ceiling because of our credentials in a way. But yet when it comes to looking at the data, like we aren't, we're not there. And sometimes we can see this gap as, well, we're not playing politics well, right? We're not doing things great. And I'm going to go a little deeper on this, Brandon, if it's okay. But I had to pick back, like, okay, what's going on here? What's really the case? And I found this study that Professor Ming Su did back in Berkeley. And this was very eye-opening for me. And it really like helped me to answer what's really going on. Is it politics? Or am I maybe trying to get a seat at the table, but I don't know how to sit at the table? And I think us as minorities, we have to realize that we need to be able to code switch. For example, I'm right-handed, right? So Brandon, if I do everything only right-handed, I am going to neglect the left-hand side of things. And being right-handed, we're a majority. We're 89% of the population.
I'm left-handed.
But you're left-handed. I love that, right? So Brandon, you're left-handed, which means Brandon has to sit at the table and realize every table he sits at is set for somebody right-handed, right? The water glass is on the right side. The utensils are on the right side. And everything is flipped around. So Brandon has a lot more what I would say leadership growth opportunity. And he's willing to exercise that because he realizes it's not always designed in the way for him. He has to be conscious of how he shows up. Whereas for me, I tend to be unconscious of how I show up. And if something is placed differently, I can excuse that as like, oh, it's usually on the right hand side, right? That's my bias. The world needs to revolve around us. So look at Ming Su's study is saying, well, let's look at relationships. And what he did was see what is the bias impact that we have. And a lot of times Everybody hires you based on two principles. One is, do I want to spend time with you? We say that's warmth. And then the other one is like, how good are you? Right? Like that's competency. So, I might like Yvonne and she's really warm. She's friendly. She's a lot of fun to be with. But if she can't do her job, I'm not going to hire her. Right? And then on the flip side, let's say, George is someone that's like really good at what he does. As he said, he's a tiger person, he gets it all done, really highly confident. But if he's a jerk to spend time with, then I don't want to hire him as well. So we got to fall somewhere in this range and identify which one do we tend to have a bias over based upon our skill sets. So what they did was they took 13,000 resumes and they sent it all the same resume. All they did was change the names on this. And what's crazy is the callback ratio that they got based upon your name. So at this point, I tell people, hey, look at the names on this list, and I'm sure there isn't one exactly like yours, but there may be one similar, right? And if you were to identify a name that's similar to, you can predict what your callback rating is. Again, what's interesting is if you have a name like Shelley's, right, you have a higher propensity to get called back and probably a funny face when they see is like, oh, Shelley, hi, you're Asian, right? Like that might occur. But here's what's really the kicker that I wanted us to see is, well, let's correlate that. What do they see according to your name? And if you are on the more Asian side, they see you more on the competency side, but not on the warm side. So go back to the question. They see me as more of a performer, not as someone with executive presence, relational ability, someone they want to spend time with me. That's probably why they hired you. Hey, I know this person's really good at getting the work done. Would I want to spend that time with them? Probably not as much as I would these people and then red names that are in red. But that's the bias that they're putting on you. So I tell people, well, if they already see you on this side, it doesn't mean that you can't perform as well as, Carrie or Matthew or Michael, but you can show them. And the difference is like when you go to a meeting, like what do most Asian people, hi, how's it going? Nice to meet you. How's your weekend? Good. You keep things very short. But to add more warmth, it could be like smile in your meeting. That's why I said like, hey, let's go on the camera here. Thank you all for joining, right? Because I know you're all confident on this call, but I want to know like how warm are you? And it's so good to see your smiles, right? That builds me desiring to want to spend more time with you on this call. But it's also what I realized like, hey, how's it going, Brandon? So good to see you. Did you have a good weekend? And a lot of people say, good. How about you? And it's like, yeah, I had a great weekend. I just came back from a trip in New York City. It was freezing cold, but I had a really good chance to walk across the Brooklyn Bridge for the first time and see the Statue of Liberty. It was awesome, right? Being a little bit more revealing and personable adds that warmth, and you become somebody that's more desirable and have a higher chance of getting hired.
So I love the succinctness of where we're here in terms of this slide, because I think the obvious question as someone who's looking at this is, all right, Jim, how do I get more warmth? What are the what are the tools, programs, tactics to help me get more warmth? And I know you just mentioned a few things. Jay just mentioned Vanessa Van Edwards. Curious from your experience firsthand, what were ways that you developed warmth for yourself?
Well, the first one is to realize like if you're not naturally a warm person, hey, that's okay. But growth is always in doing anything that is uncomfortable, right? And so being comfortable, being uncomfortable is important. And there's those people that have this what we call a natural RBF, right? The resting bitch face they call it. And what's interesting is you look at all the Hollywood stereotypes for Asians on TV, they all have an RBF, like Mr. Miyagi, right? Always was the RBF guy, right? The old man, right? Everyone's an RBF. I think what changes this is our ability to smile. The number one thing I tell people is to smile. And I practice smiling. Believe it or not, I like warmth. I'm building warmth. But I'm like the next phase is like learning to smile more often. And I get this a lot, Brandon, where people say like, man, but that's so superficial. That's so fake. Like I'm really not that warm of a person. And my response to that might be to you is like, okay, it may be superficial, but is it artificial? Meaning that you may not convey warmth, on the outside that way, but are you a warm person? Like if my dog died, would you say, I'm sorry? Or just like, tough luck, let's go on to business, right? No, you would take pause and have a little warmth there. But the second thing I think is more key is, let's say you're at a job interview. And let's say Jay, they came up to you and say, Jay, I look at your resume, it looks great, but I don't see enough Python experience. And in our company, we want people to have proficiency in Python. Would you be willing to spend extra time learning how to do Python so that we can get the job done? Jay, what would you say? No problem, right? I don't know. Like you probably say, yeah. Like a lot of us, when it comes to hard skills as Asians, we're willing to learn anything and perform anything. But when it comes to soft skills, it's weird. We have a harder time adopting soft skills. And I think those are sometimes more important than the hard skills we have. Because again, look at the data. We have the hard skills. We've got the education. We know it. We can learn hard skills, but it's the interpersonal leadership skills that we don't have that we really need to focus on. And a lot of times it's the blind spot because we never had access to see other people, maybe in our family or in other type of leadership roles that have really used soft skills as a tool to help them with their leadership growth in that way.
Amazing. I feel like we can go on this thread for a long time, but trying to be respectful of the time.
Yeah.
We do have 5 minutes left, but I do want to recap. So, like this whole arc, some of the major themes that I'm hearing is like having a Billy in our life that kind of invited you to, hey, speak up, own the vision that you have, and take the reins, so to speak. And then, despite if you're in an environment with managers that might not be inviting that. Like maybe look elsewhere, but also learn to build trust and then learn to advocate for your version of what you're wanting to create in that environment. So I hear a lot of advocation of like put yourself out there, speak up for your own sake. And this last part around competence versus warmth, which is at least statistically, seems like we have spades of competence, even in other people's biases, but not so much on the warmth side. And so, even something as a simple tactic as practice smiling, or something as simple as sharing a little bit more disclosure about your day and having more warmth in your voice and tonality, those things might do a lot to shift how people perceive us. Anything you would want to add as like a closing summary of like, here's one thing you can do or one thing you take away on top of what I just mentioned? Yeah.
Oh, great. And I know we're doing so a masterclass after this, and I really want to invite everybody to like join because I want to give you all homework. And the homework is plot yourself here. Where would people expect you to be, but where do you really want to show up? And that's your leadership growth opportunity. And I would encourage each one of you to find. Like, I'm sure I wasn't the first person to tell you ways to exhibit warmth. I loved in the chat box, right? You talked about, different speakers have talked about this. But what's most important is I want you to practice something, whether it's learning to smile as you speak more often. I learned because I had a sales role that we would always have a mirror in front of us. And every time I talked, I had to look in the mirror to make sure I'm smiling because back then, before Zoom, like people could they could see you smile across the phone, right? And so learning to do that is probably one homework assignment I'd love to give you guys and see how people respond. Or when people ask you like, hey, Christine, how was your weekend? Instead of just saying it was good, share with them like, oh, what made it good? And then throw it back to them. What was good for your weekend? Build a relationship. Or on the competency side of things, what I find is a lot of people don't share like, hey, what's your favorite thing to do? It's like, oh, I'm really good at this. It's a craft that I worked on. Like for me, it's like, one thing that I brag about is like, I make pretty good Texas style barbecue. It's a craft I've been working for 15 years. And even though it's nothing like some of the award winning Texas barbecue out there, a lot of my friends love the barbecue I make and then they drool over it, right? It sounds like I'm bragging, but I'm also letting you know, hey, if you need Texas barbecue and you want to spend time with me, like come to me. And it helps, like, for example, your managers to know, like, hey, I'm really good at this type of work. And so if you're looking for someone that you want to do this type of projects, pick on me, right? I'd love to be able to showcase that, right? You're making the job easier for somebody else to work with you. So that would be my thing to close out, Brandon, is I want to invite each one of you, do something here to move you upward and towards the right and practice it for the next couple of weeks. I would even encourage you to write that down right now. Be specific. The cheat code that I tell people is, take some Post-its, take the stickiness on the bottom, and like post like keywords, trigger words, either smile or brag. Put it right next to your camera. So every time that you're talking to the people, it's a conscious reminder to do something that you don't tend to unconsciously do. And then when we get back in a few weeks, I want you to share what that experience is like and how has that shifted maybe how people respond to you. And I've been doing this talk for like 5 years now, and it's always amazing. Those that really embrace this and are willing to challenge themselves to grow, the relationships around them start to shift. They start getting invited more. They start getting the seat at the table. And so instead of having us to fight for that chair and pull it out ourselves, you'll find other people inviting you and pulling the chair out for you instead.
Love that as a visual, and I love the concrete tactics. Yeah, I highly recommend you all signing up right now for the masterclass on December 10th. It's an amazing chance to dive deeper to if you resonated any bit with what Jim has shared so far and want to go even deeper. Highly recommend you just register for that right now. I'm super excited for that. And yeah, thank you all for being here, and I want to hand it off back to Christine or Yvonne. Any last words on the NAP side? And thank you for having us.
Thanks, Brandon. Yeah, as Jim and Brandon mentioned, we're having a masterclass. Now that you've recognized the hidden blind spots and the force of the Asian glass ceiling in your career, you can be ready to move past awareness into real transformation. And this is, as Jim mentioned, a masterclass. So it's a dedicated, action-focused experience to apply the webinar's insights, what we learned today, to achieve a true breakthrough in your leadership career. It's not a lecture, and it's a workshop that requires deep work and sharing. And so that one's on December 10th. I've dropped in the link, as you can see. Christine also dropped it in at 12:29. So if you can click on that, feel free to register. I've also included Jim and Brandon's emails in case you want to reach out to them about anything you have on your mind. And thanks so much, everyone. See you next time.
Yvonne, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.